Welcome back, everybody. Derrick Soo, your 2022 Oakland mayoral candidate. Well, May is Mental Health Month. And so what I want to do today, I want to talk about kind of my journey and also my journey through mental illness through my family. And so, as a lot of you know, I had a clinical decision about my mental health a number of years ago. When I lost all my money, I became clinically depressed and with suicidal tendencies. And in 2009, I actually had an attempt to take my life. Much like the famous name that took her life this past weekend, in the person of Naomi Judd, one of my sheroes. And she was a single mother raising Ashley Judd, Winona Judd. And so she overcame a lot of mental abuse and stress, which affects a lot of us. And when I lost all of my money, my home and everything, and realized I could not find work, I was highly stressed. And then I did make it back to the Bay Area, and my dad was able to take me in shortly after he found out that a job that I had been working at deemed me unable to fulfill their goals in how I did my job. And so that created a real problem in the sense that I no longer had an income. I had lost all my millions and I had no home. And then here's the other thing. Because I was a manager at that complex, I was a live on-site manager, and so I lost my housing. I had to move out in 7 days from that property after they terminated me. So that created a big stress. And for a while, I was actually homeless and staying with another person close by. And then finally, my dad heard about my plight and came and contacted me. And so anyway, I stayed there for a little while. And then again, there were a lot of mental issues that I was going through, PTSD, plus the loss of all of my fortune and everything that I had worked for. So mentally it was very draining. And then I developed major severe depression is the clinical term for it. And that's also what got me on a disability, because I had displayed such mental crises at that time that they actually deemed me suicidal. And like I said, in 2009, there was an actual, I made an attempt to kill myself because of the shame that I was going through and the hopelessness. And we see that in every mental crisis. There's a level of hopelessness, and that there is no foreseeable answer to their to their situation at the time. And that was true for me. And unfortunately, Naomi Judd, she took her own life. She was successful. She had previous attempts but was not successful. And then she wrote a book. She talked about her mental illness in some of the books that she published, authored and published. And so it talks about the processes that the mind goes through. And as your mental illness worsens because of the negative influences of the environment inputting, it really weighs on you. And I've seen it here when city officials close different homeless camps. close by. I've been a part of watching some of the folks that were drastically affected by losing all of their personal belongings. You know, I have pictures of folks literally in tears crying because of the loss of everything. And so everybody these days, not just the homeless, but also the housed, are under a tremendous amount of stress to keep a roof over their head. And so right now we see a lot of people working very hard. We see criminals even working very hard so that they can keep a roof over their heads. And so mental illness is a big deal here, and Naomi Judd is just another example. Then we have another big name example of Robin Williams. He took his own life also, but it's mental crises. We have mental crises that can be brought on by a lot of different things these days, and just with my family, I had an uncle. Everybody I'm about to talk about is deceased right now, and these are just family facts. And so I'm going to not use their names out of respect for them. But anyway, I had an uncle who went into World War II, and when he went into World War II, by the time everything was said and done, and he was already in transit to the war zone, they found out that he was underage. He was actually 17. He could not be in the military, and yet there's nothing that they could do at that time. They had already processed paperwork. He'd been through some basic training, and now he's on a transport overseas. And so what they ended up doing with this 17-year-old underage soldier was put him in a place where he would not be under direct fire. And so, but then this position that they put him in is what messed him up completely for the rest of his life. And my mother said that when my uncle went into the military, he was fine. He didn't smoke. He was happy-go-lucky and everything. But when he came back, he was completely changed. He was a different person, and the position that they put him in as a 17-year-old was on morgue duty. And so this was the detail that goes in to pick up the pieces of the soldiers so that they have recovered their bodies or pieces of their bodies and put them all back together to be shipped back home for services. So that particular uncle, when he came back from the war, became a serious alcoholic. Drugs weren't a big thing then, but alcohol was easy to abuse and easy to get hold of, because all you had to do was just go down to the local corner liquor store and you could kind of drown your sorrows, so to speak. And so that uncle was so heavily and mentally affected, but yet the Veterans Administration didn't find him sick enough for treatment. And so my uncle went about his life as a raging alcoholic, which was a real problem to society, because that alcoholism got him into a lot of trouble throughout the city of Oakland, got him thrown out of a lot of bars, and he got beat up a lot. And so the pain and the stress of some of the environmental things that we encounter throughout life cause us to self-medicate. And we see that especially true with the homeless community here in Oakland. The trauma and the indignity of living on the street, and the ease and the low cost of fentanyl-laced drugs. Sometimes they're free, or you can get a really big hit for $5 to $10. And so the drug abuse is very, very rampant out here. And until we start getting control of affordable housing, getting the innocent folks that are living on our city streets into safe, affordable, and supportive housing, we're not going to see much change. And right now, the candidates that are running for the City of Oakland office, I don't see any change because none of them have any real clue as to what they're doing moving forward, other than the idea that I put before the city 2 years ago in the form of community land trusts and building tiny home villages. And so right now, City of Oakland is standing up, or has already stood up, one program on 2nd and East 12th, and are ready to about unveil and open the second tiny home village, which will be in West Oakland in District 3 under Carol Fike's council seat. I just didn't want to get drowned out by the machinery rolling by here. Today is kind of cleaning day, and City of Oakland is rolling in with heavy equipment to come get the trash from this location. So, but anyway, mental health is really important. And today we have so many people that are stressed out with their work, with their finances, with keeping a roof over their head, trying to keep food in the refrigerator, and then also trying to pay their bills. How am I going to get to work with my gas bill so high? And so these are things that have to be addressed, that our current administration is not doing much about. And while there's not a whole lot that they can do about the gas prices, there is a lot of things that can be done moving forward to address homelessness, to address affordable housing, to address the illegal dumping, address sideshows, and also create new work and opportunities and two new destination attraction location to make Oakland attractive. Since we have lost two of our attractions, namely the Golden State Warriors and the Oakland Raiders were two Oakland attractions. So there's at least two attractions that need to be replaced in the very near future. And then if the Oakland A's move out of Oakland, there's another one. We do have some hope with the WNBA team negotiating for a location here at the Oakland Coliseum. But back to, sorry about that. But getting back to mental health, a lot of stress can be relieved by lowering the cost of housing so that we reduce stress and also stabilize the housing costs. And by with the economy the way it is, with inflation, with the high price of everything nowadays, especially food, what we have to do is find a way to lower the housing costs. Because back in the 90s, my wife back then, I was telling her that the prices that we were seeing happen in Alameda, where we live, and housing, the way it was being built, was not sustainable for the long term into the future. But yet it did sustain, and then we had some valleys along the way. Also, one of the valleys that we all know about was 2008, with the total collapse of the real estate market. And so things have changed in that aspect, so that what happened back in 2008 no longer can occur moving forward out of that. And so my uncle, he was so affected by having to pick up all of these body parts and identifying them to send them back home, that for his entire life, even his working life, first thing that he did in the morning, rather than most of us would commonly make a first stop at the restroom, the bathroom. This uncle, his first stop was the refrigerator to grab a beer. And so that was his morning coffee to wake up so that he could go to work. And then the sad part was that he was an aircraft mechanic working on naval aircraft. And so we all were very concerned about that because of what he was doing, his work, and then his alcoholism. And there were just so many different things. And his mouth got him into a lot of trouble. And then another source of mental illness was with my mother. My mother, when she was young, she married very young. She was in her early 20s when she married, and the person that she married ended up being very abusive. And while they had a child together, he was still very abusive, and then my mother ended that relationship and filed for divorce based upon domestic violence. It wasn't so much called that back then, but my grandfather, which was my mother's dad, he was Alameda County and also San Francisco County deputy sheriff. And so he was the one that served the warrant, or not the warrants, but the papers on the father of my half-brother. And so it traumatized my mother because of the violence that was inflicted on her. And so that always stuck in my mind, because my mother would relive that very vividly occasionally, especially if my father started raising his voice. And I remember at a very, very young age, I was probably about 3 at the time. We were living in our first home here in East Oakland. And I don't know what the argument was about, but then I remember a lamp flying across the room in the bedroom. And then shortly thereafter, Oakland Police Department visited our home, spoke with my dad, they left, and then that never happened again. And so we have PTSD. My mother suffered PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, because of the violence that occurred, and then it reoccurred in her second marriage. And this time she had 2 children. The first one had already grown up and moved out by that time. So there's a 17-year gap between myself and my half-brother. And then another experience that I had was with my second wife. My second wife, her husband was very abusive also. He was an ex-biker. He was just a really mean, nasty dude. And when I met my wife, she was changing her career. She was ending her modeling career at the time and working a degree. And she actually attained a double master's in psychology. She even finished her internship for a doctorate, to move into a doctorate for psychology. But then because of the individuals that she encountered and where she served her internship, made her rethink about her decisions for becoming a psychiatric doctor, and instead she became intellectual properties attorney. And so big change. But then my ex-wife also experienced domestic violence because of her first husband. And her first husband, like I said, he was a big guy and had a real temper. In fact, one of the things that she mentioned to me early in our dating sessions was that her ex put her last 2 boyfriends in the hospital. And I just looked at that, and she said, does that concern you any? I said, not particularly, because if somebody was coming in and doing that, they would be in serious trouble with me. And I'm not going to disclose how, but Yeah. And then she mentioned, well, he also carries a gun. I said, oh, that's not a problem, because if he kicked in my door like he did with those two, he would have been met with 9mm bullets. And so, like I said, he was a very violent person. And so my second wife also had PTSD from the violence and being literally choked out by her husband at the time, before she filed for divorce, took the child, and left. But then when he met me, he tried to intimidate me. Found that didn't go really well, because he didn't expect what I ended up doing. And so ever since then, other than a couple of little things, we more or less were civil to each other and didn't have too many issues. But he was a very violent character, and he was quite a bit bigger than me. And then my stepson started developing some mental issues with attention deficit syndrome. And so there's another type of mental illness that we had to deal with. Some of the things that I dealt with when I got diagnosed with my PTSD and also my depression was that the first thing they did was put me on medication. And then that medication was supposed to calm me down, make me less anxious. But the bad thing was that one of the side effects was that I could not remember what I did an hour ago. And living out on the street at the time, that would not be a good situation to be in if you can't remember anything or where you're supposed to be. And so medication, I had to stop. In fact, one of those medications in that 1-year trial made me more violent. And so that's some of the things, some of the side effects that we see with psychiatric drugs. They're still experimental, and everybody reacts differently. And so that's one of the things that we also have to take into account. Some of the things that I went through when I worked for this country in counterterrorism, I was constantly being mentally evaluated because I was in possession and carrying a gun, sometimes on airlines. And so they have to be reasonably sure that I'm not going to do anything destructive with my firearms, that my mental facilities, how my thought processes are normal and morally correct. And so there's a lot of things that constantly went up. And then every time there was where I ended up having to use my firearms or weapons, or where I had to defend myself, there was what they call a debriefing, which was a counseling session to talk about what had happened and what transpired, and clear my feelings about what happened. And so there were times that it was touch and go. There were one of the injuries that caused my actual forced retirement was an injury to my hip, and that laid me up for 6 months before I could walk. And so it was a very serious injury. Mentally, I knew that my work with the agencies would be terminating, and which they did because of my physical limitations now. And then another shocker that really came and more recently was in 2015 when I was diagnosed with cancer. And so here I am mentally already messed up. I've already been through some medications with psychiatry. I am now living out on Oakland streets, and I don't have so much an income of any form. I have an EBT card, which got me about $350 of food every month. And that was my only income when I first came out here. So it was weighing very heavy on my mind, on what I could do, what I couldn't do. Also thought processes, because all the traumatic things that happen out on the street affect your daily lives, and your life going from living indoors to outdoors. It is a very drastic change. It changes you forever. And then for that 1 year when I actually moved back indoors for a short period, that transition back into living indoors was also equally traumatic, but also in a good way. So, but again, mental health issues arise, and it doesn't take a whole lot. Sometimes it can be as simple as domestic violence, witnessing something traumatic, a murder perhaps, or somebody being stabbed. Or in my uncle's case, having to pick up body parts of fallen soldiers as a young person. And so these are all things that affect our minds, and we all are affected differently on everything. And again, I bring up the suicide of my hero, Naomi Judd, and also another hero right here in the Bay Area, Robin Williams. All died by suicide and mental illness issues. Like I said, I'm a survivor of a suicide attempt, and to this day, I am glad I did not succeed on that attempt. And the sad part is that I have a family member who has a lot of the same mental illnesses that I had, that I now control. I manage a lot of these symptoms and how I react. I can predict the triggers that bring on my PTSD, and so I work to avoid a lot of the triggers. But mental illness comes in many forms, and the family member that I'm talking about in this case, they had a very negative family life, and it ended up going even more south than that. But that person today is on the right road. They've been able to clean up their act and become part of normal society now. So mental health issues can be overcome, they can be managed, but you have to get professional help. And that's where our system falls down, because for the longest time, Kaiser Permanente, the mental health clinic, has been under siege for not having enough staffing for decades. Because I remember when I had Kaiser Permanente coverage, that was one of the things that was always an issue there, because I could only see my doctor once a month, and I really needed to see the doctor once a week at that point, because a lot of things that were happening. But we need more psychiatrists, psychologists. We need to figure out medications. I prefer a more holistic approach to mental health issues. And so one of the things that I've been able to use that has really helped is a certain strain of cannabis that helps me to change my thought processes and not listen to the voices that sometimes appear when stress and depression are trying to knock at the door. And so this helps me to relieve some of those anxieties in a very positive way. And then also we've seen some folks that have been able to alleviate some of the issues through magic mushroom usage here in Oakland, since the city of Oakland has now made that controversial drug legal. I didn't agree with that one so much, but I have seen some positive results with folks that have had traumas and stress from the street, and this helps them to cope with a lot of those traumas. So thanks for joining me today. That's kind of what I wanted to say about Mental Health Care Month here in May. Folks, take time out for yourself, take time out for your family, take care of your mental health. Thanks for joining me today. We'll be right back.